Okay, hello and welcome. Why don't you stay a while? Kick your feet up, grab a drink maybe. Because today we are going to be taking a trip to an island country in the east, the greatest island conglomerate east of the Prime Meridian. That is right, today we are taking a look at the one and only Scotland, home of one of the greatest cryptids known to the internet gremlins, the Loch Ness Monster. Scotland is a country known for its sheep. That's not right. Scotland is home to many famous castles, as well as its lush and diverse Scottish Highlands. Additionally, it is responsible for bringing us some of the greatest inventions, including bagpipes, whiskey, and a lot of it, and manskirts.
What?
Our story takes place in Loch Ness, Scotland. For those who don't know, because I obviously did before researching this subject, loch is the Scottish Gaelic word for lake or ocean arm, a word used exclusively in Scotland and Ireland. Loch Ness is part of the Scottish Highlands located in the northeastern part of Scotland, close to Inverness, Scotland. It is a large freshwater lake connected to the North Sea via River Ness. Loch Ness extends approximately 37 kilometers or 23 miles for the non-metric... I can't say that. Loch Ness extends approximately 37 kilometers or 23 miles for the non-metric losers northwest of Inverness. With a volume of 1.775 cubic miles, 230 meter depth, and almost 2 trillion gallons of water, Loch Ness is home to a great variety of Scottish wildlife. A great diverse ecosystem including the ferox trout, the sea trout, the brown trout, fried trout, steamed trout, sushi trout, raw trout, and things besides trout. But most importantly, it is the home of our subject of the day, the Loch Ness monster, Nessie. Now, there are many loch monsters, believe it or not. We have Morag, the Loch Morar monster, and Muxlake, the Loch Marie monster, to name a few. But what makes the Loch Ness monster unique? Well, aside from it having the simplest name, because silly little internet people can't be bothered with words above one syllable, the Loch Ness monster has also achieved internet stardom thanks to worldwide publicity. That is right. The media has made everyone's favorite up-looking dolphin into the internet treasure it is today. But before we get into the awfully interesting effects public opinion has on the cryptids running for election, we must first answer the burning question I'm sure maybe one of you might have. What the hell is a Nessie? The Loch Ness monster, affectionately referred to as Nessie, is a Leviathan-type cryptid whose first well-documented sighting happened in 1933. The date was July 22nd, 1933. A new road had been constructed recently along Loch Ness, promising a clear view of the lake from the road. George Spicer and his wife took this opportunity, hoping for a tranquil trip through the Scottish countryside. The last thing they ever expected was to come face to face with a monster. They described their encounter with the creature with awestruck wonder, stating it was a towering beast with a long neck and 2 thin, broad limbs protruding from a place near the base of its neck and lower down its body. They explained that the monster dragged itself in front of their vehicle before disappearing into the undisturbed waters of the loch. News of a monster roaming the highlands sparked interest for the otherwise serene image of the loch. The Inverness Courier, a local news station centered in Inverness, Scotland, inserted a segment in the newspaper regarding the creature with Mr. Spicer's testimony. This was the moment the legend of the Loch Ness Monster was born. The story of the Loch Ness Monster brought great fame to Scotland as a place for the occult and inexplicable. Its effect cemented by local folklore that seemingly credited the existence of these monsters. One such story is the tale of Saint Columba and the Beast. According to a biography by Adamnan, the saint encountered such a beast during his stay in Scotland near Urquhart Castle. The official Urquhart Castle website even embraces the story as part of the ruins history. The legend goes that during the saint's visit near the castle, what is now nothing but ruins, he heard a cry for help. Upon reaching Loch Ness, he found a swimmer screaming as a creature dashed towards them. Apparently, the creature had bitten other swimmers in the past. Its attacks became known and feared, like those of a ravenous shark or a rabid squirrel. The saint then called to the beast, before any harm was done to the pleading swimmer, ordering it to return from whatever hell it crawled from. The creature obeyed, surprisingly, and fled. This encounter became one of St. Columba's many miracles. Now, there have been other reports regarding a bulbous creature in and around that area of the Highlands. Like I said, there are the other loch monsters before and after Nessie, as well as other creatures from Scottish folklore that could obscure judgment. Stories regarding the Loch Ness Monster date back to the 19th century and even before. Written proof, like the saint's biography and news coverage, sparked interest for the little loch in the northeast of Scotland. However, All of this evidence pales in comparison to what effects photography had on the mystery of Loch Ness. I want to make one thing clear. In the 1930s, photography was still a revolutionary technology. Although photography dated back more than a century prior, it was still viewed as the pinnacle of recollection technology. The concept of photographic tampering was nothing new or unexpected during this era, but it was heard of very little and the public didn't seem to care like they do today. Think of the phrase, "a picture is worth 1,000 words." In this era, a picture was as valid, if not more, than anything written or spoken. That is why the true legend of Nessie didn't come into the limelight until the cameras were turned on. Then all eyes turned to one. Now we move on to photographic evidence, to tell the story of a single photograph that fooled millions for decades to come. A scheme devised from the mind of a petty man. After George Spicer's segment on local news, many more people came out of the woodwork claiming they witnessed the Loch Ness Monster. As the legend caught fire, people began attempting to photograph the mythical beast. One such case happened on November 12th, the same year the Ness Courier wrote about the monster. 1933, a man named Hugh Gray was taking his routine walk along Loch Ness near Ness after church. Along the way, he noticed something emerging from the water not too far from where he stood. In an instant, the man pulled out his camera and snapped a few pictures. He then rushed to the local news stations to show his proof. However, he received nothing but ridicule and skepticism. To me, his story doesn't make much sense either. First of all, the man had just gotten out of Sunday church, so he was likely wearing something classy but impractical. And if we take a look at cameras from the 1930s, you will see that they are some of the bulkiest things ever created by mankind. Call me ignorant, but I firmly believe that Hugh Gray's Sunday khakis were a bit too tight to be carrying around such a monster, especially without raising questions on the hallowed grounds of church. Also, these kinds of cameras are not as simple as taking them out and pressing a button to snap a few pictures. It took time to prepare, and I believe that is why out of the many pictures he showed to the press, only one had sufficient evidence to make a case. However, it was not as effective as he had hoped. Many people criticized his photograph, claiming that it wasn't the Loch Ness Monster. Instead, it was perhaps a simple dog going out for a swim with a big stick in his mouth. Some researchers even claimed that it was some sort of whale that somehow made it to the loch through River Ness. This backlash from the public was quite impactful. Like I said, photographic evidence was damn near unquestionable. Additionally, humanity is always in the need to discover something new. They grasp at straws if that means that it leads to something that would shatter the mold of the natural world. So negative feedback like this up the ante and expectations of photographers and hunters alike that hope to find something regarding the creature. Now, speaking of hunters, the next person on our timeline was a highly esteemed hunter called Marmaduke Wetherall. Wetherall, much like Spicer, is a critical subject to the legend of Nessie. Another news station, the Daily Mail, saw the success of the Loch Ness Monster in the Ness Courier and thought, hey, that story made a huge splash. I want to replicate that. But a simple report from a single individual would not be enough this time. Instead, they decided to hire a big games hunter to find the creature and capture it. That is where Marmalade Weatherball comes in, and oh boy did he show results quickly. In 1933, as the year was coming to an end, Marmaduke found some footprints on the ground near the loch. He claimed that they were from a heavy, soft-footed animal that dragged itself along the ground using large, broad flippers. Once more, the public went into a frenzy. However, this jubilance only lasted a few mere moments. Soon after, zoologists at the Natural History Museum, upon analyzing the markings, discovered that they were those of a hippopotamus. Specifically, the footprints had been falsified, using a dried hippo foot, typically used as an umbrella stand back in those times. Now, the question was, did Marmaduke plant this false evidence, or was it a prank from local ruffians? Wetherall was a hunter, but he was also an actor and screenwriter. It wouldn't come as a surprise to anyone if the aged actor wanted his name on something as large as the Loch Ness Monster mystery before he died. Regardless of how it happened, this fumble brought great ridicule to his name instead, and Marmaduke Wetherall disappeared from the public eye for a while. Moving on to one of, if not the greatest pieces of evidence regarding the existence of the Loch Ness Monster. On April 21st, 1934, almost a year after the first sighting, the Daily Mail returned, this time with a story far better than their failures with the hunter Marmaduke. A photograph so groundbreaking, the story became the headline of that week's newspaper. The photograph showed a picture taken by Colonel Robert Kenneth Wilson, a renowned surgeon of the UK. The photograph, printed onto the front pages, became known as the surgeon's photograph of 1934. Now, when researching for this picture, I found it strange that this surgeon explicitly asked the media to keep his name away from the photograph. After all, the Loch Ness mystery was the biggest thing in Scotland at the time. And sure, he was a well-known man already through his job as a doctor, but a little bit more publicity could never hurt. At least that is what I think. Anyway, regardless, this is where the story of the Loch Ness Monster picks up speed. Hundreds flock to the loch in order to capture a glimpse of the elusive monster. Nearby towns and cities profited greatly, setting up tours and museums, some of which still stand to this day. This high kept up until 1984. As time moves on, humanity becomes increasingly skeptical of the technologies that were once new. Photographic tampering became a subject of great debate, and it brought new questions and mistrust of camera-captured evidence. That is why, in his article in the British Journal of Photography, Stuart Campbell stated his findings regarding the famed photograph. It turns out that the photograph had been cropped, zoomed, distorted, and incredibly altered for its spotlight on the front pages of the Daily Mail. The original image shows a more zoomed out instant, where a black bar is seen at the top. Campbell surmised that this was the opposite bank of Loch Ness, meaning that the object in the water, believed by many to be the great Loch Ness Monster, was in fact a much smaller creature, possibly about 3 to 4 feet. This didn't add up with eyewitness reports claiming that the monster was a towering creature of about 20 feet in length. This meant that either 1, Mother Nature is beautiful and we witnessed the miracles of childbirth, or 2, and more likely, that this was a picture of an otter or even a seabird mid-dive. Well, Campbell's discoveries really put a damper on the monster fever of the 80s, but there were still many skeptics and desperate believers that kept the myth alive. After all, even professionals made mistakes. Alas, that all changed in 1994, 60 years after the photograph graced the pages of the Daily Mail. A man named Christopher Spurring confirmed that the surgeon's photograph was nothing but a hoax, admitting to his involvement in its production. It turns out that this man is actually the stepson of our great pal Marmaduke Weatherall. And oh boy, here is where things get a little bit goofy. Weatherall, humiliated and angry that his name was dragged through the mud in 1933, approached Spurring and enlisted him into fabricating a toy submarine fitted with the serpent's head on top. After taking a few pictures of the toy in the loch, they gave the finished product to Robert Kenneth Wilson, using him as the face of the scheme because of his reputation as a good doctor. This also explains why he didn't want his name to be associated with the photograph. I mean, he was a good doctor and he was, trusted, so it would be really bad on his name to be discovered as part of this scheme. But regardless, Wilson gave the photograph to the Daily Mail, and thus the greatest hoax was born. Now, the question was, why did Marmaduke do all of this? I mean, it's outlandish. Well, revenge, of course. Rather than going out in a blazing ball of glory for his work as an actor, screenwriter, hunter, whatever, Marmaduke Weatherall was seen as a fraud and a joke to the public. His hard-earned reputation sullied in an instant. So his plan was to bring the mythos to life by his own accord and possibly prove to the world that he was superior in that way. In the end, he died before he could do anything with the scheme. Now, he has gone down in history as one of the pettiest Scooby-Doo villains in the world. The exposure of the surgeon's photograph solidified the death of the Loch Ness mystery. With one of the greatest pieces of evidence fully dismantled, the hope of Nessie's existence quickly faded into internet history, or at least that is how it should have been. Perhaps the chance of fishing up the Loch Ness monster has died down from everyone's mind, but the fandom interest for the gentle giant is still very much alive today. This seemingly immortality is what makes the Loch Ness monster one of the greatest cryptids worldwide, and why its legend has yet to die to this day.